The top Democrat in the Minnesota House says that she won't apologize for calling out her male colleagues who she says are silencing women lawmakers, especially women of color.
A DFL minority leader, Melissa Hortman, today filed a letter of protest with the House and told a state capitol rally of mostly women that she's not going to take it anymore. Pat Kessler's at the Capitol right now. Pat?
Hi, Frank. Yeah, Representative Hortman used a barnyard expletive to describe how she says women are treated here at the Capitol, and she says she's not sorry for bringing it up. Mostly women showed up for a Capitol rally supporting Democratic leader Hortman, who Republicans are accusing of sexism and racism for comments about white male colleagues.
Part of why what I said touched a nerve is so many of us have had that experience of being ignored. And let's not just let it go anymore. Let's call bull when we see it.
Hortman is under fire for breaking House protocol a couple of weeks ago as lawmakers drifted away during emotional speeches by women of color.
I hate to break up the 100% white male card game in the retiring room, but
Hortman is formally rejecting the Republican demand for an apology. The House Speaker accusing her of trying to divide the state.
We've got a lot of work to do on behalf of all Minnesotans, of every race, of every gender, of every sex. We've got a lot of work to do, and we're committed to doing that work. This is a sideshow.
Rally protesters carried signs supporting Hortman, who told us women are frustrated by a lifetime of being ignored.
This is a common experience that women have of being talked over, being interrupted, having somebody else articulate an idea after you've articulated it, and then all of a sudden it sounds like a good idea. This is a very common experience.
Well, Representative Horton told us she does not want the Minnesota legislature to silence black and brown voices. She says she's trying to raise awareness about all of this, and Frank, she certainly did that today.
Yeah, making a lot of news, no doubt. All right, Pat, live at the Capitol. Thank you.
Our opening clip was a CBS Minnesota news segment from April 2017 on State Representative Melissa Hortman. As Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives from 2019 to 2025, Hortman stood up to Republicans, turning Minnesota into a shining example of all the good our leaders can and must do in turning their state into a safe haven for trans people, making sure kids got free lunches at school. This is the greatest gift to a society, investing in the body and minds of the people by ensuring they're fed and that they feel safe. Just like with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the worst people are killing our best people, as they say in Ukraine. And this past weekend, the worst of America killed the best of America. But in the story of defiant American progress, Minnesotans flooded their state capitol for the No Kings protest. And in that spirit, I'm very happy to share that a Gaslit Nation listener in Minnesota reached out to me to start a signal group so that listeners in Minnesota can find each other, connect, and plant seeds of progress together. That is right. A Gaslit Nation listener in Minnesota said, you know what? We're finally getting that Gaslit Nation signal group for listeners in our state off the ground, and we're going to find each other and we're going to build. That is the only response to this evil. Flood their darkness with our light. That is how we do it here at Gaslit Nation, together. I'm so proud of our community, especially to our listeners in Minnesota, for refusing to back down. That attitude is how Ukrainians drove Yanukovych fleeing to Russia, where he remains in exile to this day. Today is June 19th, otherwise known as Juneteenth, a federal holiday marking when the last enslaved people in the South, in Galveston, Texas, learned about the abolition of slavery, a whole 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Why did it take so long? Because, like we're seeing today with MAGA and Trump, white male patriarchy is determined to dominate other human beings for greed, for insecure ego, for bloodlust. That explains Trump today. On June 19, 1865, Union forces could finally move into Texas after traitor Robert E. Lee's surrender. and force the slave owners in Texas to follow the law. That all formerly enslaved people were free. And that's what we must do today. Force these traitors and their criminal overlords to follow the law. And in order to do that, we need to raise an army of lawmakers, of reformers, of anti-corruption activists. And we must do it on the shoulders of the giants who came before us, including Melissa Hortman. To continue our conversation on justice, accountability, and the people demanding abolition from the chains that try to enslave us from the oligarchy, including trying to hold us back with their tax cuts for the rich, paid for by the very poor, where they want to roll back regulations to poison our bodies, enrich themselves through their social media and their propaganda channels to pollute our minds. And we're not going to let that happen. We're not going to let them encage our collective potential. We here on this week's bonus show have an incredibly important discussion on impeachment. Yes, impeachment. Why it matters, why now, and how we can all get involved to force accountability. Most importantly, demanding impeachment is an incredibly powerful and urgent historical record to show who was on the right side of history in Congress. The case for impeachment, built by us in the grassroots power machines, forces members of Congress to speak with their actions and not their words. It helps us weed out who is really truly on our side and who is bought off, controlled opposition. Impeachment puts every single member of Congress on trial, and that is why we need to do it. Here to help us lift the veil on why Democrats in Congress, the majority, are refusing to impeach Trump is Kira Havens of Citizens Impeachment. Her partner in that movement, Gabe Garbowit, could not join us for this conversation as planned. He formerly worked for Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota, who, unfortunately, like so many others, was on that horrific kill list of that MAGA fascist. So as you can imagine, Gabe and his community had a lot to deal with. In addition to all their other work fighting fascism, we hope he will be on the show with us very soon. This conversation was recorded Monday, June 16 at our Gaslit Nation Salon on Patreon. The full recording can be found there, including the audience Q&A, which was brilliant as always. Thank you to everyone who joined the discussion. To get involved, check out citizensimpeachment.com. Before we head into this essential conversation with Kira Havens of Citizens Impeachment, I want to play this clip of Brad Lander, New York City's comptroller and Gaslit Nation's number one choice to be our next mayor, who we had on the show in May. I'll link to my interview with Brad Lander in the show notes. These are his remarks when he was just freed from arrest by Trump's Gestapo, ICE, for simply trying to ensure constitutionally protected due process under the law. We will play his remarks now in case anyone out there needs any more reason to impeach Felon 47.
I'm going to sleep in my bed tonight, safe with my family. I'm grateful to hear that the charges are not being brought, but if they are, I've got a lawyer. I don't have to worry about my due process rights. At that elevator, I was separated from someone named Edgardo, who I had just met a couple of minutes earlier. Edgardo is in ICE detention, and he's not going to sleep in his bed tonight. So far as I know, he has no lawyer. He has been stripped of his due process rights by a government and a judge that owe him a credible fear hearing before they deport him, and yet have decided instead to strip folks like Edgardo and the prior gentleman that I walked out with, whose native language is Yoruba, and who only got a translator in French. And so when the judge said, do you understand what it means that after I dismiss your case, you'll have no status? He said, no status, as he recognized what was about to happen. So I will be fine, but Edgardo is not going to be fine, and the rule of law is not fine, and our constitutional democracy is not fine.
Welcome to the Gaslit Nation Salon for June 16, 2025, where we are going to talk all things impeachment. We just had the historic No Kings March, organized by so many heroic men and women and non-binary folks across the nation, including Rise and Resist, our very own Julie of Rise and Resist, who's here as always on the salon. We love you, Julie. Thank you so much. And we're just so honored to everyone who showed up and showed out and reminded the world, do not give up on America. We hate him just as much as you do, and we are going to stop him, and he's a creep, and he has to go. There's just so much to talk about. We just had in the news, in addition to these historic protests, Trump's regime posted some social media posts saying like, happy Flag Day, everyone. And they included the Russian flag. It wasn't an oversight. Like, it was very literally the Russian flag along with the American flag. And you might think they're just dumb. They're just sloppy, ignorant. There's no talent there. They can't even hire. No one credible wants to work for them. True, it could very much be that. But then again, Trump is walking, talking Kremlin disinformation. Just at the G7, in a live press conference with Mark Carney, Canada, of course, is hosting G7. Mark Carney had to cut Trump off because he was spouting Kremlin disinformation, saying Russia's invasion of Ukraine would never have happened if Obama hadn't kicked Russia out of the G8. Russia was kicked out of the G8 because it invaded Ukraine. And then, on his birthday, Putin calls, and Trump is so excited about this phone call that he posts a long social media post about Putin calling him on his birthday. What, to give him instructions on how to clamp down on protesters? Like, to give him, marching orders to what, it's just basically, it's very, very disturbing. We've had so many experts on the show talk about Trump and Russia's decades-long corruption connection union. No credible bank would lend to Trump, and then he needed the Russians to come along to save him. So go back to every single Gaslit Nation episode for that. I just can't get over the people out there across the political spectrum who think Trump and Russia is just an internet meme. He is literally mobbed up with the Russians, and he wants to turn America into a Russian-style oligarchy, which is why he gave himself a military parade on his birthday. That was extremely sad. There was a viral video of a American tank like squeaking down the street. Like, it was so silent and empty that you could hear the tank squeaking. Meanwhile, the crowds were loud and mad, and the chants and people standing out in the rain for hours. I was in the rain for hours chanting. It was just so beautiful. And I feel uplifted. And I looked around at all of these people, and I just felt completely safe. And I knew that no matter how dark it gets, these are the people that are going to have my back, and I'm going to have their back. And so that's a reminder of what we all stand for. Now, to build off of this momentum, we need to now push for impeachment. We need every single member of Congress to speak with their actions, not with their words. And here to walk us through that, to understand, like, how do we get there? And does impeachment even matter? Can it even make a difference? A U.S. Air Force vet, Kira Havens. Kira, thank you so much for being here. You have been a major grassroots organizer, ringing the alarm for impeachment. What are you hearing? And I know you have connections with your network on Capitol Hill. So walk us through, speak to the most cynical out there who's rolling their eyes at me more than usual, okay? And saying, like, why impeachment? Like, both impeachments didn't stop him, made zero difference. But why? Do you really think a third time is going to make a difference?
Yeah. And I just want to say, first off, I have not been a political organizer for a really long time. I have had many, many different kinds of careers. I was a scientist for a while. As you mentioned, I'm a veteran. And this is the first time I'm really coming into close contact with the political system as a whole. And let me tell you, it has been an education on my part. I think the thing that I would really like to say most of all is that, everybody has power. The citizens have power. They used their First Amendment rights of free speech and free assembly this past weekend in an incredibly constructive and, as you said, beautiful way to say, we like our democracy. We want to keep it just as loud as humanly possible. Millions of people out there. And the thing I want to say most about the impeachment movement is that our members of Congress have power too, and they are simply choosing not to use it. There's many different examples of ways in which they are just sitting on their hands and refusing to take action. Lots of words, lots of discussion about how things are bad and Trump is bad and his administration is bad, but very little by way of actual tangible actions to slow down the administration's efforts to install nominees, to go through legislation. There's a fundamental misunderstanding of the way to play the game, it seems. Either they don't know the rules or they don't care about the rules, or they're playing a completely different game from the one that the people in power are playing. And it really shows right now.
I want to ask, because I know you and I spoke earlier about what you're hearing from Congress and even the good ones, like Elizabeth Warren, let's say. You were talking about earlier in our phone call today about how you spent some time watching Congress and how all of them, even the Democrats, weren't using all of the leverage they have at their disposal. And they're basically falling into the trap. And I know this trap because I spent 3.5 months interning on Capitol Hill. Right before my senior year of college, I was an energy and environmental intern for Senator Barbara Boxer of California. So I witnessed the decorum up close that you're talking about. Washington, D.C. is the largest city outside of the South. So it's very Southern. That's one thing that surprises you when you work on Capitol Hill is just you hear the Southern accents everywhere. And it just has more of that Southern formality to it. Capitol Hill does. And there is this oppressive decorum where everyone's in formal dress and they're all in their TV-ready makeup. You can see who the members of Congress are because they're physically glowing under all of that tanning makeup. And everyone just sort of is like putting on airs, and you can just see the egos radiating off these people. And so to step out of line and ring the alarm, as Al Green did, getting himself censored, which he was speaking on behalf of the American people because this is an emergency. You look like a freak. You absolutely do. And so this whole decorum business, could you talk about that? Because it's a real thing. It is the swamp itself.
Yeah, it is certainly like a force, like the force of gravity holding all of this, holding what should be an incredibly powerful and dynamic body kind of still in an endless inertia. The decorum piece of it, what really caught my attention at the beginning of this year was, we knew what was coming. We had a president being sworn in that had promised to do mass deportations and had promised many violations of civil liberties just kind of out in the open. Everybody knew what was out there. Then all of a sudden, the pace started picking up. The nominees got confirmed, the legislation got passed, and I started looking around trying to figure out what exactly was happening here, who was taking a stand, who was going to get in the way of it. And I came across a gentleman named Gabe Garbowit, who had worked in the Senate in the past, and Gabe was being very plain and clear in his discussion of the actions of the Senate in particular, because that's where he came from, that it did not have to be this way, that all senators the Senate was designed so that a minority can rein in the excesses of the minority or majority. That is why it is designed. So every senator has an incredible amount of power. And in the way the Senate runs right now, there's a lot of archaic rules, right? But it's a very difficult thing to get those rules changed. So one super simple tool for any senator to use is simply to deny what's called unanimous consent. All these archaic rules that exist, the Senate can ask at any time, can we just skip this rule? Can we bypass it? They can do it, but everybody has to agree. And the only thing it takes to throw a wrench in that particular plan is just for you to say no. Tuberville is a great example. He held up military nominations for about 10 months, just decided, nope, he didn't want to do that.
Senator from Alabama. He was abusing our military for months.
And it is a completely legal rule of the game in the Senate. That is a thing that you can do at any time, any one of them without any planning can just say no thank you and kill whatever the proposal is that would require unanimous consent.
And
drove it to a halt.
Not a single Democratic senator is willing to do this for us. even though
Well,
people are being kidnapped off the street.
yeah, it's the story is actually a little bit worse than that because I thought it couldn't possibly be that easy, but it turns out it is. That is the actual rule. You just have to say no. And so I
I
started
do want
counting.
to I do
Oh, go ahead.
I want to interrupt quickly to say your friend that you mentioned earlier, Gabe, he worked for Senator of Minnesota.
Tina Smith,
Gabe
yes.
Gabe was supposed to be here with us today. He had an emergency, like he's very
Mhm.
busy today. He and I were texting. But and it's my heart breaks because Gabe, Senator Tina Smith she represents Minnesota.
Yep. Yep, this is entirely correct. And Tina Smith has said many
Well, no, but
very
what
severe things.
happened in Minnesota this weekend,
Oh, yes, of course.
right? Where there was another MAGA political assassination of one of the queens of Minnesota. Who, we've always talked on this show about how Minnesota has the best Democratic Party in the union. They are the model for the rest of the state to follow. And there's two of the state reps that were gunned down. One did not survive. She was the speaker. And she was the one that got it all done. It was because of her that Minnesota became such a golden standard for the rest of the country to follow. And
In
that
a
was
very tight political environment, right? I think a single vote was the scenario, and she worked it. She used her power. She's a great example of someone who actually surveys the landscape that they are in and brings their power to bear in effective ways. It can be done.
It can be done. And so my heart goes out to Gabe because I know he must know the whole community out of Minnesota. And it was a huge shock what happened this weekend. And Gabe is one of the really resounding voices out there that is speaking major truth to power. But please go on.
The idea that there was this very simple, easy tool that anybody could use to hold up the whole business of the Senate at any time was intriguing. And I checked to see, well, how often could this happen? Really, how many times do they use unanimous consent? And so I just started reading the congressional record and counting. And by mid-April, I was up to 500 different instances of unanimous consent where everybody in the entire Senate, every single one of them, all the Democrats and all of the Republicans agreed that they should all agree to skip the rules and speed things along. It happens for everything. It happens for nominations. It happens for quorum calls, which is the designated number of people required to just be in that room to make legislation and to do the business of the chamber. That, I believe, got skipped about 200 times just alone. And even if every single one of those quorum calls had taken 10 minutes, that was a solid days that the legislative business could have been held up. Most concerningly was that it was pretty clear that unanimous consent rejections happen fairly routinely. But you know who does them? It's the Republicans to shoot down attempts that Democrats are making to save, USAID or to ensure cancer funding gets kept in the budget. They simply say no, and then everybody moves on. This happened in the budget reconciliation too. In order to get the budget reconciliation voted that week, the continuing resolution, that week, there were actually 3 different days where they had to issue unanimous consents to speed it along to put it on the calendar in order to get it out there. And that day that they passed the continuing resolution, after they passed it, they then proceeded to walk amendments through. The Democrats proceeded to walk amendments through, except they required unanimous consent for every single one. And so they got shot down by Republicans. It is that easy. All you have to do is say no. And this is one of the most frustrating things about this is that you can see the language sneaking into press conferences and articles. Elizabeth Warren, for example, had a write-up in Common Dreams with a bold "We do not consent!" exclamation point article. But she did. She consented 500 times, as did every single one of her colleagues in the Senate, to allow legislation and nominees to roll right through. It's incredibly disappointing that they're choosing not to use their power this way.
Why do you think that is, from what you've heard? Because I know you and others have been pressing members of Congress to introduce articles of impeachment, just to take that step.
There is a pervasive sense that this is just business as usual. And if we get to the midterms, we'll be able to, the idea, of course, is that as a political party, they will be able to reclaim power. And it, in my opinion, really avoids looking at the reality of the situation in terms of the deteriorating status of our democratic rule and law and checks and balances. Those are eroding really fast, and I don't believe we have time to wait until the midterms.
I don't even think we're going to have midterms. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, he's speaking. I mean, I don't know how he's voting. I'm sure you're watching him too, and he's doing exactly what Elizabeth Warren is doing, where she says one thing to the base, one thing to the media, and doesn't exercise the full levers of their power. But Chris Murphy was saying, like, my party needs to get out of this attitude of waiting for the midterms when we might not have midterms. Like, he said that.
Well, I mean, this is true, but I also want to stress that Chris Murphy himself can just start saying no. He doesn't need to wait for anybody else. He can step out in front and say, you know what? I actually believe the words I'm saying, and I'm going to act like it. So no to your unanimous consent request. No to leaving early. The Senate, I haven't kept up with the unanimous consent piece of this recently, but 8 weeks in, they had only worked more than 40 hours once in that entire week. All of their other weeks were around 30 or 35 hours in chamber. They could be doing more, and they are not, including the individuals that talk the loudest game about doing more.
So Cory Booker did that entire filibuster, and that was an endurance. So it was Olympian, right? Physically, I mean, I don't know, was he wearing a diaper? I would have been wearing a diaper, but to do something like that. But it's like he physically put himself through that, and then he can't even he can't do what you're suggesting.
Do you know what happened immediately after
Tell
he
me
gave that speech?
Tell us.
They used unanimous consent to speed track another nominee. I think that's immediately afterwards. Yeah, it is just, and Booker has objected to unanimous consent in the past, notably around the Fentanyl Act, the HALT Fentanyl Act. And when he did that, it took another 2 weeks for the fentanyl legislation to come back into the chamber for a vote. When he did that, he actually apologized, what he apologized for was for making his colleague, the Republican senator that was focused on bringing a much more draconian approach to fentanyl with his own set of legislation. He apologized to that Republican colleague for making him be on the floor of the Senate. And it is one of the most wild parts about this is that being forced to be in the Senate, physically present, is a punishment. That was the threat that Lankford used to bring people together and force through the continuing resolution. The analogy was, I'm going to treat you like children and make you all sit in here until you hash it out, just like, if your kids were fighting, that's what you would do. It is a real spending time in the chamber doing this work and having to be physically present is a real problem. That's why they skip the quorum calls all the time. They're just not there.
This is kind of like Ukraine's parliament during the lead up to Euromaidan, the revolution that overthrew Ukraine's wannabe Trumpian dictator. So, America, we're there. We're at that point. So, do you recommend, we've always said on this show, elect the lesser evil, elect the Democrats, because at least you can negotiate with them, right? And we'll have a relatively safer environment for us to politically organize, as we're seeing. And so do you think we should be occupying the offices of Elizabeth Warren and Cory Booker and Chris Murphy and say, enough talk, more action?
I think there needs to be much more of a feedback loop. These days, I work with a group called Citizens Impeachment. Obviously, we're focused on impeachment as a thing that has to happen, and I work with Gabe on that. And we did a poll. We coordinated people, got them together, asked them to send a raft of messages. Had about 600 people send messages into their representatives about impeachment. And then we just asked, how did your representatives respond? And 53% of people said their rep just didn't respond at all. 32% of folks said that they got a response that was unrelated about some other piece of legislation or some random, here's a list of things I did and here's why Trump is bad type conversation. And then 10% of people got a no, and 6% of people got a yes. And I just want to caveat that yes by saying 6% of people thought they got a yes, but those same representatives did not talk to us and did not say yes to us when we asked them to go on the record. And for the most part, there's a few that did, but in large part, folks that clicked that that button saying their representative supports impeachment, we don't have a public statement from them. We don't have articles of impeachment resolutions from them. The only two people to have actually taken that action are Representative Al Green and Representative Thanadar. That's it. So just even the most basic feedback component of this, of a citizen being able to tell their elected representative, I think this is important, and having that information be relayed and received and actually getting a response that is relevant and targeted and addresses their concerns, even that part is broken. Yes, the Democrats are doing a terrible job of listening to people. They're doing a terrible job of listening to their base and to addressing their concerns.
So there's questions in the chat, and we know this already, like what you're saying, we know, but it just feels very therapeutic to hear somebody with, because like you said, you're partnered with Gabe for citizens impeachment, and Gabe is a former congressional staffer. So it is nice to get the validation that it's obvious by their actions, right? We see it we believe our eyes and ears here at Gaslit Nation. But I do want to just share this question in the chat because it captures a lot of this cognitive dissonance. Like, wow. So Meep writes, so in the Senate, if any senator wants to stop a bill or something, they just need to say no to moving forward or agreeing to something through unanimous consent. Is that right? How do we explain this to others?
Oh boy. Yeah. So, there are other ways to move legislation through the Senate, but, Congress.gov records all of the going-ons of the Senate verbatim. They've got stenographers there, and you can just Control F unanimous consent, and you can see how many times they request unanimous consent, and they will request it to introduce a bill. They will request it to cut short the amount of debate required for nominees. They will request it to bring an intern onto the floor, or to use a placard while they talk, or to congratulate a high school championship. They used it to applaud Mitch McConnell on his retirement, and everybody agreed to it and then clapped. Like, that's the level of clubbiness that we're talking about here. It is just folks can't fathom not using it. And one of the little deep dives that I did was, where did this come from? Why have we started using unanimous consent thousands of times per legislative session? And basically in the mid-90s, it all changed, kind of when Newt Gingrich and Contract for America and all of that came into play. The way business got done started looking much more like this, with unanimous consent and everybody holding hands to conduct business as usual. But it does not have to be this way. The problem is most of our senators have been there for the 30 plus years, right? That they've been doing this, and some of the newer ones have never seen it done a different way. It is stunning, the simplicity and ease with which our elected officials in the Senate could object to the goings-on of this administration and choose not to. I think the question was about, how do we explain it, right? And it is as simple as this, that the Senate is a chamber of government that is in place for the minority to be able to curb the excesses of the majority. That's it. That's why it's there. And this is the job they are there to do.
The minority party, in this case, the Democrats, they do have levers to at least slow down government.
Oh, yeah.
And by slowing it down, making things painful, like what Tommy Tuberville did by slowing down promotions, that by slowing it down, that forces leverage. You want to get things done, you have to make a deal with us. So just because somebody wrote in the chat, Kent wrote, denying unanimous consent does not stop the forward motion of Senate actions. It does slow things down, because without unanimous consent, there are a lot of steps to keep an action going. In the Tuberville example, he put hold on all promotions. To overcome the Senate would have had to take each promotion up for debate, which would take too much time. Promotion stopped. Yes, but what we're saying is this is leverage. This is leverage, and they're just not using their leverage, and that's the problem. And we saw this with Schumer and the big budget battle that he punted on. And Schumer operates like they have something on him, whether it's blackmail or donors that they share that they're both trying to please. Like, Schumer's compromised. He operates like somebody who's compromised. He's way too timid and too ingratiating to be in that position of power. I know we're talking about impeachment today, but to talk about impeachment is to talk about Congress, because it is a congressional mechanism for accountability.
And let's be quite frank, right? There have been two impeachments previously, and there are people in the current legislative body that have led those impeachments and pushed them through, and they're not quite at the point where they're doing that this time. It is not about, for me personally, it is not about being able to guarantee a certain result. It's about doing the right thing. And there's no question, there is no debate, there is no uncertainty as to whether or not this president and his administration is conducting unconstitutional actions. He is. We know that. That is correct. That is what is happening here. And the appropriate response, the response that's codified in the Constitution, the only response to removing a tyrant from office is impeachment. That's it. I swore an oath as a member of the armed forces. The senators and the representatives that are currently elected to office also swore that oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And if they're not willing to uphold that oath, why are they there? I think this is a litmus test. If they're concerned about the midterms, for me, I mean, this is going to be the big question. Did you choose to uphold your oath of office or not?
So there's a question in the chat. Do you think Senator Padilla could be moved to block unanimous consent? He is my senator. And that question's from Jen. And of course, Senator Padilla is the one that was roughly manhandled by those cops at Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's press conference. It was a horrible video, the videos that came out of his near arrest. It looked like he was being arrested very roughly. Yeah. So do you think he could be radicalized to come on our side and actually do something?
I would love that. I would be thrilled if this got Senator Padilla thinking seriously about the need to be an actual opposition party and realize that there is no way to be civil enough. There is no way to be respectable enough for this administration to say, oh, I recognize you're my equal. They are interested in preserving their power and dominating over who they perceive as their enemies. And I think that's also a good thing to be really clear about. This is not a business as usual situation. We are not dealing with simply different concepts of what a democratic ideal look like. We are really choosing between democracy and the rule of law and autocracy. And until that choice becomes clear, it's going to be difficult, I think, to move people off that mark. But hopefully Senator Padilla's experience has started that process. And let me just go on the record here right now. I would be thrilled to sit down with him or his staff and lay it out, whatever they need. I am here to help.
What about Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota, who Gabe used to work for? What feedback has Gabe gotten from her office?
It's all public, right? She has not objected to unanimous consent either. The actions speak much louder than words. Here,
So what hashtag should we be using to educate people? I mean, this should be a Twitter storm, a social media storm, where we all start doing unanimous consent and educating Americans in a very pithy, viral way.
Refuse unanimous consent. I think that's all it needs to be.
All we have to do is quote tweet Senator Tina Smith, Senator Chris Murphy, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Padilla, and just be like, actions speak louder. Why don't you give me that? I hate the language. It's unanimous consent. Because what does that mean? That sounds like something like a sex talk or something you're giving high school kids these days.
That's good stuff. Oh my gosh. I think.
And it doesn't have to be Twitter, it could be Blue Sky, Facebook, but maybe, Kira, you and I join forces after this and we just write we did this with Ukraine Zero Maidan. We wrote 100 pre-made tweets at the height of that revolution. And we created an easy template for people to just hit any of the buttons and they would our messages would automatically populate their social media.
I would love to do that.
And we just need to boil this down to dumb fuck phrasing that anyone can get, including me, because I'm unanimous consent. Okay, I won't touch you. I won't.
And this is the thing. It's wonky and it's weird. And in my past life as a scientist, data visualization is a thing I did, right? And so I just dropped a couple threads that I made a while back on this sort of stuff. And it really is just a matter of making it very visible and clear that this is a thing you can do. You are choosing not to do it. And it is time to step up. I do like the Dems just say no that Julie just put in.
Well, of course, because Julie's rise and resist, and they're like the geniuses of today.
Perfect.
Yeah, Dems just say no. That's don't you
Yeah.
consent. Dems don't you consent. Georgia has a good one too.
Use your
Dems
power.
use your power.
Is the key, right?
But
Like
then, but the
understanding what
thing
your
is,
power has.
Cece wrote, Dems use your power. When you write that on social media, you have like 12 other resistance accounts saying they're not in power.
Well, so here's the thing. It goes back to the protest again. Everybody has power of some kind. And if you only believe that being a majority is power, you have already lost. Because from wherever you are, you can understand what your landscape is and who your network is and who your people are, and you can begin to push the conversation and affect change. Everybody can do this. Me, you, them, all of us. The powers that Congress has, these are some of the most powerful people on the planet. I'll just give one example, and we're going to shift chambers again. This is to the House. But when Representative Thanedar introduced his articles of impeachment, he was able to put up billboards. All the House reps get funding for billboards. Like they can do that. That's just
I'm sorry,
that they
billboards on the roads?
Impeach. Yeah, he has money to be able to promote
taxpayer money to put up billboards
for the policies that they want to.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So
why aren't they all putting up billboards then around United issues?
Do they not know? I have no idea. Do they not want to? I have no idea. I just know they're not doing it. And this Thanedar is one of the people that uses this tool most because he knows it's out there and he can. So if you look up billboards, like you'll see in Michigan, they're just big signs that said impeach up. And that is a tool that you can use. There's so much power that is just being left off to the side, and we're killing ourselves out here. It would be great. It would be great if we learn the rules of the game for the people that are elected. Like I would love that.
This is heartbreaking. If I was in their position, I would have so many billboards up, and I'd go to my colleagues and say, hey, I maxed out my billboards budget. Can I use your budget? Here's what I want to put on these billboards. Like every single, if I was Schumer, I'd have my entire caucus maxing out their billboard budget on a united message that drove people to action.
But this would require you to want people to take that action, right? And this is what it really comes down to. Like this is a choice not to use this power. It's a choice to decide the only type of power matters is that nominal power of having all of the seats that you theoretically wanted, right? It does not recognize that as an elected member of the US Congress, you have an astonishing amount of power. You can call up people to write an impeachment article for you every single day if you want. You can just say no to the majority if you're in the Senate, and there will be literally zero consequences of any kind, because that's what it's there for. It's there to give you many options so that we can rein in the excesses of the majority. That's the whole concept. Country exists because we decided like a tyrant was a bad way to rule. And the entire system is geared towards giving you options to restrain a tyrant or remove them. One fascinating thing about the impeachment work has been that there's no actual legal definition of impeachment. You can do it for whatever reason you want at any time. Not like we are lacking for options here. There are many, many different unconstitutional actions, bribery, corruption of all sorts of shades, but you can pick any reason you want, and you can just introduce an article a day and slow work down that way. That is also a form of obstruction. One thing that maybe I should call out here is that it's not even like this is an unpopular situation. I don't know, Andrea, if you saw the poll from Data for Progress recently. They did a poll on impeachment and just asked, what do Americans support impeachment, right? We're talking about it now. Let's find out. Guess what percent of Democrats support impeachment?
How many?
84%. 84%, 64% of them strongly support it. And the other, 16% or whatever, somewhat support it. It's not even like this is unpopular. 1 in every 5 Republicans supports it. This administration and this president are obviously unconstitutional. Day after day after day, we have new impeachable offenses every single day. It is a win. It is a win to step up and say, I see this, I am going to uphold my oath, and I am going to initiate these proceedings because I believe in the Constitution. Like that's it. That's nobody, I don't, doesn't even matter who does it. The polling is linked to in the chat right there. But this is not a sides type of thing. It's if you believe that we should follow the Constitution, I mean, now's your chance.
Yeah, absolutely. While you still have a chance.
Yeah.
So I wanted to mention to everyone, I listened to two podcasts, which I'll share in the show notes for this episode, both with Michael Wolff, who's a scumbag of a human being, but he is sort of like the yearbook committee for the Trump regime. The Trump crowd loves spilling dirty, dirty Trump gossip of Trump world to Michael Wolff because he is a Hamptons media royalty figure. Like he's the elite that Trump has always aspired to his entire life. Like Trump had John Barron, the name he would use to leak to the press all these decades about Trump. Like Trump is a narcissist. He needs attention. So Michael Wolff will write these books about Trump world, exposing all the inner workings because Trump world is full of narcissists and they love that. They love the Hampton elites buying up all these books and obsessively reading about them. It gives them the attention and that power that they crave. And on top of that, just like any sort of criminals and dictator, they flaunt their corruption. They flaunt their power because they're getting away with it because no one's stopping them. And so Michael Wolff gets in and he gets this access. And it's been interesting listening to his current book tour. And I forget the name of the book because I'm not buying it, but I'll listen to these podcasts instead. And one thing that he said was that Pam Bondi, coming from Florida, where she was notorious for being dumb as rocks, she was that blonde Barbie that they would put in front of the camera, but because she would be able to do the Fox News bit, say, snarking off some bullshit. But in terms of actual legal work, she had to be layered with like 20 lawyers who'd actually have to do the mental load, the heavy lifting. But she's dumb as rocks, and she's basically Trump's personal secretary. Pam Bondi, the congressionally confirmed Attorney General of the United States, who is supposed to be the people's lawyer, is basically Trump's gopher. Like Trump will call her directly, according to Michael Wolff. Trump will just has Pam Bondi on speed dial all the time, telling her what to do. Trump treats Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, like his own personal using the law of the federal government to go after Trump's enemies. That's where we are. That's a massive, massive crisis point.
Oh,
and people
absolutely.
are desensitized to that.
Do you know how many times the Senate used unanimous consent to confirm Pam Bondi?
0.
Three different times.
3 different times.
3 different times.
Okay, so I'm clearly not getting unanimous consent. I'm still confused.
It's for every rule. Every single nominee gets a certain amount of debate time, and there's a space where you can discuss or question, or there's also cloture, which I'm still a little bit fuzzy on. But for each of these steps in the process, you can ask to skip it through unanimous consent. And that is what they did 3 different times. And she is far from the only nominee to get that process. Basically, the only person who wasn't was Russ Vought, who made it in anyway, but took him 30 hours to do it, which again is sometimes the entire number of hours that the Senate is in the chamber in a legislative session for a week.
Yeah. And then also ICE is becoming increasingly emboldened. The Secret Service is becoming increasingly emboldened. Carol Leonnig of the Washington Post wrote a 5-alarm fire book looking at the MAGA culture that dominates the Secret Service. And the Secret Service and ICE just held a raid where they broke down the door of this Asian American couple in Irvine, California, looking for their son who was putting up posters. Wanted by ICE and the Secret Service for putting up protest posters in Irvine.
Wow.
And they confiscated all like a router, a bunch of tech things from the home. And they made an example of the parents, like brought them outside the home. The community was traumatized. This was just reported, and I'll link to that article in the show notes. So ICE and the Secret Service are behaving increasingly like a dictatorship's private security force, like Trump's own security force, just like Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice are now Trump's personal law firm, along with all the other law firms that he's blackmailed into submission, that have like bowed down to him and offered him all of this like free legal help, which is basically like, you're on my leash now. You can't come after me. And any client that you represent who has any cases against me or might or does any work that conflicts with me, they now have to find new representation because there's now a conflict of interest. So it's very scary, the consolidation of power that is going on right now. And no one should be numb to it. And if anyone asks, why are we even going to try to do impeachment? It's because fighting on every front matters. And the push for impeachment is exposing the fact that even our so-called best Democrats in Congress are all talk and no action. And we need to go after all of them without tearing ourselves apart, without tearing each other apart. Because I know people are going to get very nervous now thinking that we're just like the folks in 2024 that attacked Biden 24/7, attacked Kamala 24/7, and refused to vote because of purity tests. And obviously, Gaza was traumatizing, obviously, and still is. And there's a lot of things to be said about that. Of course, we understand, we acknowledge that at the time, but we always told people, vote like this is your last election, because it very well might be. So we need to, as a united front, stay together. And I think more people the veil is lifting, right? This sort of age of disillusionment is descending upon the land. And our goal is to get through it to the other side. That's what we all need to do now, is to get through it to the other side. Like, put on our big girl and big boy pants and be like, none of these guys work for us, and we have to sit down face to face with those who we find we have the strongest shot of negotiating with. Is that Chris Murphy? Is it Elizabeth Warren? Should we be going to their offices and saying, like, here's a list of things you could be doing? Why aren't you doing this?
That is a great question. And I'll just draw from some of the experience that Gabe has shared with me. A lot of times it is simply that that's just not how it's done. There's not maybe a real reason, like there's not a punishment that will be issued. There's not a censorship. There's not, perhaps somebody will get stripped of a committee or something like that if they really step across.
Right, like Katie Porter. Katie Porter was going viral with the resistance crowd on social media. Like, everyone loved her with her white billboard, and then suddenly she was losing
and I think
committee positions.
This is a really important piece of the puzzle, right? When Thanadar introduced his articles of impeachment, and furthermore, when he pushed for bringing those articles to a vote within 2 days using Rule 9, that there was a volley of reactive media pieces basically calling him names and saying that he was selfish and undermining the party. And I just want to stress that the pushback is surprising to me anyway, and dramatic and intense. And so the need, what I spoke about before, about the need for that feedback, for being able to say very clearly and plainly, this is what your constituents want, do what your constituents are asking you to do, that needs to be rebuilt. And just like with Senator Padilla, I welcome conversations from anybody currently elected in Congress who has the courage to side with the American people instead of their nominal leadership, because quite frankly, their leadership is not meeting the moment in any way, shape, or form. There has to be a realignment. There has to be an understanding that the power comes from the people, period, full stop. And if you are not willing, and if you repeatedly show that you are not willing to listen to the people that elect you, as you said earlier, it's time for you to go.
Absolutely. And so Isabel has a question. Do you think that this weekend has changed the dynamics a little bit? Millions of Americans marching across the country. Some of these reps spoke at these marches. Do you think that that might move the needle?
I am a little bit jaded after all the work that I've done. I'll just preface my answer with that. I hope that yes, that is the case, that is viewed as a turning point. But I really think that the dynamics that are changing are going to be our dynamics, right? Those protests demonstrated that there are a lot of us out here, and there are many of us willing to take action. And I hope we do take that next step, and people do look for campaigns to join, impeachment campaign or the other actions suggested by No Kings. But I mean, let's be really honest about this. There needs to be, until I see someone taking action that indicates that they understand this is not business as usual. This is not politics as usual. This is a choice between democracy and autocracy, not how can we white knuckle it till the midterms. I remain skeptical that change is going to happen simply because we showed up. We need unified, cohesive demands, and those demands have to be heard and responded to before anything will change.
Elise has a comment. Is it possible the Dems want MAGA to fail so miserably that the majority of Americans will reject Trump?
I mean, I think that they've said that pretty plainly, but I mean, what else do you want, man? Like, we've got a gutted federal government and Marines on U.S. soil, and the nationalization of the National Guard overriding a governor, and measles. I mean, like, what else do we need? I feel like that reasoning is not if that's what they wanted, I feel like they have more than enough, especially given the polling that says their base is demanding basically unanimously that they take action in this way and remove this tyrant.
Holly writes, Masha Gessen insists that we have to use the ground we have to fight on now because we might not have a future or tomorrow. And Masha Gessen, of course, is a Russian American. So yeah, absolutely. And then Isabel writes, the contrast to Trump's paltry turnout for his pathetic parade was stark. Contrast to our marches of the No Kings protests. Millions in the street. Yes. And I want to ask you, as a veteran, when you watched clips of Trump's military parade, there was one viral analysis of a veteran who was saying, look, the military that was marching in this parade, they looked demoralized. They showed up, they did their duty, but you could just tell they were not putting their all into it. Was that your read of the body language, the marching, the looks in their faces, or whatever other indicators you're aware of?
Oh boy. That's, I think, yeah, it is not there have been several stories. I have been following the Marines in LA more than any other story right now, right? What are we doing here? What is this deployment? Are we even going to get paid? The contrast between, the vibrant and full-throated defense of, or love of democracy in the No Kings protests versus the brittle display of power, right, of someone trying to look strong was very dramatic. What I truly hope is that we are able to build the political momentum that strips this nominal power from people that should not be allowed anywhere near it, from people that are simply going to abuse it at every turn for whatever internal rationales that they have going on there. It's great that we know that there are many of us and that many of us care and that many of us are laser focused and on that understand that this is the turning point and we need to rally to preserve the democracy. But what that means is doing the boring stuff, right? It means, like you said, getting into the offices with the representatives and the senators. It means calling five times a day about your topics. It means organizing with people in your district specifically and taking shifts, right? Have one person show up in your representative's district office every single day asking the same question. Rotate, share notes, send someone in again the next day. We are going to have to get much more proactive and much more creative with the actions that we're taking. Because as of right now, the listening isn't happening.
Thank you for that. And the thing people have to understand is this. It's not about, like, nothing's going to hold him accountable because he's a mob boss. He's literally a mob boss. Like Andrew McCabe, who was like deputy director of the FBI, said that when he met Trump, he felt like he was talking to a mob boss because Trump operates like a mob boss. And so we're up against the mafia. That's why the whole Russia connection is very normal to us folks who understand how the Russian mafia state of Russia operates. It's like no brainer. And so anyway, yeah, we're going to try to stop Trump, but it's going to take many different things. The whole sand in their gears metaphor is the best metaphor, meaning all of us do something and we're relentless and we don't stop. No matter what they try to throw at us, we don't stop. But impeachment is extremely informative for exposing controlled opposition, which is a very important tool of how dictators come to power, how autocracy, the frog in the boiling water happens, because you have these theatrics in the halls of power. Even Putin has political opponents in the Kremlin. These guys that talk a good game and they say things and they openly criticize what he's doing and what the regime is doing, but they're on the same payroll. They're all on the same payroll. And that's what's happening here with our government, with Congress, is they're all, at the end of the day, on the same payroll. And crypto is increasingly capturing both parties now. I don't know if you're noticing that, everyone. But so our whole point is that the way you revamp the impeachment conversation, because before, in our Pollyanna years together, when America was still sort of in this age of innocence, where all the hipster kids in Manhattan were wearing Robert Mueller t-shirts, we had this feeling. I didn't personally, because I'm Ukrainian. I was like, we've been invaded. But nationally, there was this feeling in the air of we've got to impeach him. Here comes the big blue wave. We're going to impeach him. And this feeling of like impeachment to stop Trump. It's not about stopping Trump, because not one thing can stop him. The court cases could not stop him. Trump on live TV trying to violently overthrow our democracy could not stop him. So it's going to just take us just being relentless.